feel ovulation. So rather than menstrual phobia being a symptom of patriarchy, the concealment and reticence would therefore be a reaction to the patriarchy and a type of fighting back. It's just something I had never considered before until this evening, because it is so menstrual phobic, but perhaps it is a way, it is a reaction to
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered what you thought of that.
Okay. It is another way. I mean, with those the female coalitions, the above all, the important thing for them is to keep the same, whatever the signal is, everybody keep the same signal. So we can look at lots of cultures, modesty cultures, the notion that women, wherever they are, locally, whatever culture it is, want to kind of do the same thing, whatever that be. Now, if we think about examples like Christianity, if we think about the Christian mate, I mean, in the case with the Dogon, we're looking at Dogon people trying out Christianity, and maybe kind of it's in a very alien context for it. If we think of the Western, not just Western European, but the European heritage of Christianity, the marriage in Christianity is meant to be lifelong, till death us do part. Whose business is it that a woman is menstruating? If the woman and her husband are meant to be only ever having sex with each other, think of the imagery of the Scarlet Woman, which comes out of the Whore of Babylon too, doesn't it? A Scarlet Woman is that person who is demonstrating she's menstrual. And that is so disruptive to a civilization that expects lifelong fidelity of the partners. It's just complete disruption. So I would look at any particular culture and its history of how does it relate to economy and the actual marriage system. But when we come out of the patriarchal aspects of Christianity, I'd kind of agree with you. If women are able to hide menstruation to some extent, and just, as in kind of a modern environment, we do an enormous amount of menstruating, but by hiding it, we kind of preserve a freedom. It's like a concealment of ovulation. That is true. The extreme example, we have a kind of spectrum of total females coalition totally confuses the males about who's actually menstruating, all the way to complete male control. The Dogon are not at the extreme end of that. The extreme end of that were harems of emperors of China. The emperor of China might have, in the Tang dynasty, hundreds of concubines, and he had eunuchs, and he had a new Shi secretariat of elderly ladies whose job it was to record the menstrual cycles, the menstrual calendar of every one of those concubines, and line them up on a kind of conveyor belt to be served up at the right moment to the alpha male. So that guy had a lot of reproductive success. So the more you have total male control knowledge of menstrual calendars, that is the ultra patriarchy. And the more you have female confusion of knowledge of menstruation, hopefully that's the direction of patriarchy. But if we can't link up the symbolism with the signal of menstruation, that maybe means we are atomized. We may have a lot of individual strategic freedom, but we're atomized. Yeah? Yeah. Any more thoughts about that?
Yes.
Sorry.
Just to understand female tradition work, is that to protect the fertile women or women, or is that to oppose the rising from the alpha women?
So just a bit louder.
So the female coalitions that you're talking about just now,
Yeah.
to protect the fertile women or women, or is that to oppose the rising?
Well, yes, to make.
Or is it more collective?
Oh, it's collective. It's appropriating the signal of menstruation collectively. So they're creating a situation of collective of reproduction that generates a system of collective of production by the males. So males are provisioning that whole coalition. There is no such thing as man the hunter with husband provisioning wife in hunter-gatherer cultures. What you get is men bringing meat back to a whole camp of individuals and sharing across that whole camp. So this female cosmetic coalition is entirely collectivized, yes. But it is protecting the most valuable, fertile women from being abducted by would-be alpha males. Yes, yeah.
Scarlet lipstick is very much like blood on lace. And
nail varnish,
and is sort of associated with the scarlet woman.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking about is, so you can have a culture where nobody wears makeup because they're quite puritanical, and then one woman comes in, she's got a great slash of red lipstick. So she's saying, you know, have me men. Or maybe.
Well, it's not quite that. Have me, is it? She's drawing attention to her potential fertility. And the fact that she may be available potentially, but it's not quite as simple as because it's imminent fertility.
Imminent.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking is, could it be that modern women, sharing how to do the latest makeup together? So that everybody's doing the same similar ones rather than one woman sort of succeeding more than others is a form of a coalition.
Female coalitions are alive and well. You go to any bunch of girls who are getting themselves dolled up to go out on the town at the weekend, and they're putting on their makeup and their lipstick together, and they're going out together. Maybe they're getting blind drunk together as a way of bonding that coalition, but they are sure operating as a female collective coalition. And what is their message, especially to the guys that they're out there with, is, you know, you have some respect, because you're not just dealing with one of us. You're not just picking and choosing one of us. You're dealing with a lot of us. So I do think, you know, this is deep in our species. This whole mentality, psychology, the emotional context of putting on cosmetics together. And just remember that these cultures, they don't have any mirrors. You know, you're putting on cosmetics together, you're doing the paint together. If you go in a hunter-gatherer camp with mirrors, the women really want them, but it immediately has the effect that women can start doing things to themselves in a much more atomized way. So this is such an old psychology that it is not going to get wiped out by even 2,000 years of Christianity, never mind a few hundred years of industrial capitalism. Cosmetics, of course, are commodified and you know, integrated, is a massive industry integrated into capitalism. But even so, when you go into shops to pick up cosmetics, there's a kind of elaborate ceremonial around cosmetics. The beauty, the tips, the beauty, the selling of gifts. You've got to have little gifts. You can't just do it as a straight trade without somehow debasing it. So I think female cosmetic, the idea that cosmetics are necessarily competitive is a wrong idea. I have a PhD student, well, she completed a doctorate, who particularly looked at direct sale cosmetics in Slovakia and was finding extraordinary female coalitions operating, and an extraordinary emotional bonding with some of that. So yeah, I think it's true.
There's a whole culture of women doing YouTubes to teach other women good cosmetics,
beauty tips, all this, yes. Women's magazines, all of that is like they're new versions of the same kind of idea that you get together, you help each other, those who are in your coalition. There is nothing, if we think of this from a sexual selection point of view, there is nothing more valuable or more trusting or more potentially bonding than showing your kind of weaknesses and flaws to other women and helping them with the beautification process And in hunter-gatherer egalitarian contexts, or in most traditional contexts, ritual and the cosmetics associated to ritual, what is the signal above all that is coming over with that is that you've been beautified, you've been made up for decoration in that ritual. It's because someone cares for you. It is showing that you are not alone. You are being cared for. Somebody cares for you. Is the most fundamental signal.
Yeah, I'm interested in the men stealing the women's skirts, and I'm wondering about the act of creation in a way, because women are the ones who bring life into this world, and I wondered whether that was part of the pursuit for the men to have the skirts, to take some of that power that we have as women as creators.
Absolutely. They are taking women's reproduction as the most powerful metaphor of the reproduction of society, and they are laying claim to be the ones who can do that. So they're really laying claim to ritual power itself. This is telling us that the language of ritual power is originally biologically menstrual. It is originally the language of women's bodies, fundamentally. Now, men can join in that language because men are also brothers and sons of the women who have those bodies. But in the cases like the Dogon, and we'll hear more about this from Chris, especially with the Aboriginal Australian, is very interesting examples. The rainbow snake, that's such a mighty symbol of Aboriginal Australian cosmology, is fundamentally a symbol of ritual menstrual solidarity, which is then taken over by the men, openly admitted to be taken over by that this used to be women's business, we just took it over. They're admitting it. So it tells us that really powerfully. Far from it being the case that because you menstruate, you cannot go close to ritual and sacred places. Because you menstruate, you are more plugged into to going to the other world, just like the Kalahari maiden who goes to first creation and takes everyone with her. Yeah.
I was just wondering, Camilla, thinking of a lot of people here that come new to all this,
yes.
What everyone feels about the language you're using earlier on.
Yeah.
About menstruation being a big problem, it's conflictual, it's competitive, with an arms race, all this rather violent language. I'm not sure that everyone would be necessarily happy with it.
Was there anyone who is feeling that way, that had a issue with it? I mean, I don't know whether anyone wants to stick their neck out and say, yeah, problematic. All these models, the models of explaining the evolution of menstruation, and then the models that we've developed on the female cosmetic coalitions, are models of sexual conflict or parent-offspring conflict coming from selfish gene theory. Yeah, this is very controversial. And there were feminists raising objections to the idea that pregnancy should be modelled as an internecine warfare between the mother and fetus. Okay, but then hang on a minute. If you can scientifically explain what's going on in pregnancy with diabetes, preeclampsia, all the things that can go wrong, then isn't that a good model? It's good that we understand things, because the alternative to that model is to have a kind of Aristotelian perspective and see, oh, women, they are just faulty men. They can't even do pregnancy properly. Yeah, so you have to send in the male doctors to sort them out and cut them open and do all that stuff. But if you understand things from an evolutionary perspective, you can see women as bodies that have been beautifully adapted by evolution for this extraordinary costly effort in the pregnancy of this very large-brained offspring. So it makes out women and their bodies as this beautifully adapted organism. And the fetuses as well as beautifully adapted organisms. It's a tug of war, but if it works, it works well. It's a kind of dance. You could think of it as a dance, if you like, rather than an internecine warfare. Perhaps that's the best way. The tug of war metaphor is quite nice, because tug of war is actually something that's used a lot in hunter-gatherer cultures as a way of having a sort of battle of the sexes, which is hilarious sport often it is. So that feels not so bad.
Perhaps say a little bit about morning sickness. You skipped over that.
Well, the morning sickness, it's part of the same idea as the quality control, that by the fetus raises the level. It's HCG, it's chorionic gonadotrophin. The levels of that hormone go shooting up about 1,000 times more than normal, and they're coming from the manipulation of that little fetus. But what the fetus is doing is shouting at the mother, "Hey, I am a fantastic fetus, have me." It wants to stay in there, it wants to be the one that gets picked on by the mother. And the mother, as a consequence, her morning sickness period corresponds to when the HCG is pumping out. So that's one of the arguments that David Haig used about morning sickness. Yeah.
It's not because the fetus doesn't want you to eat.
No, it's not about avoiding toxins and things like that, which was the traditional explanation. It is in response. It's a byproduct of these very raised hormonal levels. And basically, Haig, who's schooled in this selfish gene conflict model of genetic interest, is saying if you have hormonal levels rising like that through the roof, it's a kind of shouting. It's a kind of shouting concept. You got voices being raised by the hormonal, the hormones being batted back and forth. So there is conflict. You shout when there's kind of conflict, or you've got something to shout against. We've got one there, one behind the pillar. Have you been for a long time? I'm not sure. And then maybe you go.
I was just wondering about the cosmetic, the way in which the coalition either embellishes or hides menstruation.
Yeah.
So we've got the rocks and the sort of hiding through creating it.
Through creating it, through amplifying and war paint. Yeah.
Exactly. Do you think there might be other ways, like clothing, like covering genitals, or like?
But often ritual implies special. Yes. Often ritual though implies special garments, pubic aprons, which figure enormously in Bushman mythology. So you can hide things, but actually that's drawing attention to it. So it isn't hiding. Even using a menstrual, it's not hiding to use a menstrual heart. You're drawing attention. So it's quite difficult to know how do you actually just remove it. Obviously if you have a culture where everyone kind of very puritanically does wear the same kind of clothing and just makes it uniform, then maybe that's easier. For hunter-gatherers in a hominin background, they would have sort of traditionally cash sex and some sort of moss or bark type of material, maybe to soak up menstrual flow. So it would be possible. But they have so much superstition or ideas. Jerome will tell more about this when he's talking on Aquila in a few lectures' time. So much, what do we call menstrual etiquette? Menstrual etiquette is just very significant in all these indigenous cultures. And the etiquette of what do you do with that? You've got to dispose of that blood in very careful ways. And it has implications for the relations between men, women, animals, the forest. It's not just any normal substance. It's got a special potency about it, is the thing. But so cultures like Christianity, which try to eradicate the potency, they are the exceptions. They're not the rule, really. And we've got to kind of work out why they do that. You do.
I'm curious about menstruation synchronization.
Okay.
I don't know how that came up in your research, if it ever came up, but I've been talking a lot about that lately with girlfriends, and it really happened.
Right.
Like when we travel together.
Okay.
And how was that? Until today, it can be seen as something weird or like witchcraft.
How many women in this room think they've experienced menstrual synchrony? We got a large number. Wow, okay. So I skillfully evaded that topic.
Why?
I wrote a whole book about it.
It is Well, you did the book. Well, how can I can't teach you much on that, can I? Yeah. If you have weird women, us lot, will have a lot more, because we have many more menstruations, maybe 3 to 4 times more menstruations, therefore necessarily will have much more experience of menstrual synchrony. If only an eighth of the time of a woman in like a hunter-gatherer culture is actually doing menstrual cycles, that doesn't mean the amount of time she's actually menstruating. In a hunter-gatherer camp, maybe 15, 20 women max. Out of those women, only about 2 of them might be at the same time cycling at all, even to be exactly the same. Now, seasonality can make that more significant because maybe the rains mean there's more energy and people start to get fat and they start to menstruate and so on. Menstrual synchrony is a bit of a myth. But we have we are well designed. Menstruation is pretty much organised on lunar cyclicity. There's huge variation amongst women, but the variation basically goes across the 29.5 value. It's 29.5 rather than 28. 29.5 days of the lunar cycle as seen through its phases from Earth. The women of most reproductive, of the peak reproductive age in their 20s are more likely to have corresponding cycles to the lunar length. Even pregnancy has a lunar cyclicity factor to it, 9 moons, pretty much. So we seem well designed by evolution to pick up the lunar rhythm. We are well designed for that. And what's funny about hunter-gatherers, even if it's hard to believe there was all that much menstrual synchrony happening, is that if one woman does start menstruating, another woman looking at her, the ideology is that they will start menstruating together. It's very ideological in a hunter-gatherer. The Hadza would have this belief, we menstruate together, and it's connected to the moon. So there's a persistent ideology. The reality of behaviour is not properly researched. Beverly Strassman did research it with the dog on, and she came to a conclusion that was negative.
But you'd expect that because they're pulling.
But they are not hunter-gatherers. They are potentially women in contest with each other for resources, and therefore they may not have the conditions for emotional solidarity for women to may require for menstrual synchrony. So that should not be taken as a conclusion. It's, as far as science is concerned, science at the moment says that the methods used to establish menstrual synchrony are just statistically invalid, and it's well, yeah, but that's what science says. But that is not what hunter-gatherers say.
Such a thing as science, and it says something. I mean,
well, that's what the people who've researched it with scientific method applying the statistics. Sorry.
Of all the primates, they all have some kind of menstrual cycle, but some are like 18 days, some are 40 days, some are 36 days, like chimps. And there's one primate.
No, it's not one. Other great apes have very close to 28, 29. Gorillas and orangs.
Yes, okay, but the human is like one of the. Right, maybe
don't
3, but I mean exactly the length of cycle.
Yeah,
you will predict. There is synchronizing menstruation has proved adaptive in the evolutionary past. It's Homo sapiens. So.
There is a lunar default in primates because primates came from lunar nocturnal ancestry. Okay.
Can we change the subject?
Stephen had one, and then maybe and this lady and Stephen.
Yeah. Can I respectfully urge that we don't keep picking at this heretical scab? Because menstrual synchrony is part of the model. And you've done enough mathematics in Oxford to learn about models. You must have done light inextensible strings so that the little loves don't have catenaries and have to worry about hyperbolic functions. They're just straight strings like that. This is part of the model.
Except that my models of cultural meant that menstruation is not left to, synchrony is not left to chance, it's culturally appropriated. Synchrony is culturally created. It's ideologically created. And once the women do that, then of course the men can do it. So there is a default underlay of, if I got onto the subject of Neanderthals, I would talk about reproductive synchrony, because almost surely the Neanderthals did more than we did. The reason being that Neanderthals would have had a much more seasonal environment to their reproduction than us. And that may explain significant differences between us and them. But yeah, there's a basic default potential of synchrony there that can emerge.
That's an extraordinary show of hands from this group.
There was, yeah, sure was. So this lady's going.
Do you think that menstrual concealment and taboo is a product of monogamous society? So
yeah.
Studies of menstrual symbolism and when monogamy begins?
Yeah.
You said
monogamy is monogamy that's meant to be lifelong monogamy, and that means monogamy for both man and woman, because of course a lot of monogamy is monogamy for women and not for men. So
marriage,
so
that,
I think that there is likely to be a significant connection.
Yeah.
And that would correlate to a lot of Indo-European. I mean, there's only really one big main part of the world where monogamy is really monogamy, is Indo-European, connected to dowry systems, etc. So that's where we might expect the suppression of a lot of menstrual taboos.
But doesn't it actually literally suppress menstruation? If women are kept at home, individualized, then they're prevented from menstruating, because as soon as they're given birth, then even though this period of lactation is repressed, and they have
that's a very good comment, actually. Yes, yeah.
They're appropriated for sex, before they would be naturally physically.
There is this amazing paper that some of you might be aware of by Sarah Hurdy on the wet nursing industry in Europe, France, Catholic Europe of the through 18th, 19th century, which was it was like a human dairy milk industry where nurses were taking over. Now it had various forms at different levels of society, but aristocratic women would be handing over, take Megan, when she gives birth, she'll be handing over a baby to some wet nurse, and able to start cycling within, having babies like a year apart, practically, popping out a baby every year, and therefore hardly menstruating at all.
Yeah, so menstruation.
And being constantly sexually available to their husbands. So to the point that some aristocratic women were having 16, 18 children, eventually getting worn out.
Yeah, but that's the long distance from female control of fertility.
Yeah. And things like the Catholic, postpartum taboos were being suppressed. It was like the duty to have sex with husband. So any postpartum taboos, meaning sex taboos when a woman's breastfeeding, are being suppressed by removing her from breastfeeding. Basically, you're letting somebody else do the breastfeeding. And of course that is class structured, because the woman who's actually doing the work of breastfeeding is you're going down the class ladder in that. So it is the indication of a profoundly inegalitarian society when that's happening.
Yeah. 5 minutes before we stop.
We had a few other questions going around. Anyone else? Yeah.
One thing that I find really interesting about this debate today is how we become more aware of different gender identities.
And sorry, say it louder. How?
I think one thing that's really interesting about the menstruation debate today is how we become more aware of gender identities.
Okay, yes.
And obviously we have to acknowledge that menstrual taboo has affected people who are assigned female at birth and identify as female the most.
Yeah.
But how do we today discuss menstruation when we live in a world where a lot of people who identify as men menstruate too, and people who don't identify as men who identify as women don't menstruate? How do we approach the gendering of the topic?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I've seen some moving YouTubes or stuff online about, there's this young man who's gender transited, who became a woman, started to menstruate as a young woman, and he's part of a sort of team of menstrual ambassadors to discuss this kind of subject. But I'd say that we can draw on our incredible menstrual cosmological heritage as a species, because in these when I'm saying female cosmetic coalitions, of course they totally include men in those coalitions, brothers and sons in those coalitions, as part of the taboo complex. When Jerome is talking about Ekila as the main kind of polysemic concept of the Bayaka, all the menstrual observances that a woman who menstruates performs impact all the people in her hut, and they are responding with their own observances. And in addition to that, these cultures of these hunter-gatherers, the Bushmen, Bayaka, the Hadza, are incredible, and the Dogon, they may be patriarchal, but my God, this is gender fluidity in their concepts. They're just so their concepts are so sophisticated of what. So a young girl coming to initiate, she's got a masculine and a feminine part. She's composed of both parts, and so is a young boy. And they then may have different ways of addressing that, but the concepts are so much more sophisticated than what we've inherited in a sort of black-white, very Western patriarchal Christian heritage of the feminine and the masculine. It's just much more sophisticated. So we can draw on all that.